A man who never spoke to anyone just walked into the loudest saloon in Wyoming and said 5 words that made the whole room go silent. I need a wife by morning. Not because he wanted one, because if he didn't find one before sunrise, 2 kids waiting in his freezing cabin would be ripped apart and sent to opposite ends of the territory. He had 12 hours, no money to offer, no charm to convince anyone, just a desperate promise to children who'd already lost everything. And everyone in that room thought he was insane. This is his story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The snow came early that year, not the gentle kind that drifted down and made the world look clean. This was the mean snow, the kind that killed livestock and buried entire wagons before you even knew they were missing. It turned the Wyoming mountains into a graveyard, white and silent and ruthless. Caleb Thorne knew that better than most. He'd been living alone in those mountains for 6 years, ever since the war ended, and he decided he was done with people, done with noise, done with the whole damn mess of civilization. His cabin sat 3 miles off the nearest trail, tucked into a valley so remote that even hunters rarely stumbled across it. That's how he liked it. Winter meant silence. Winter meant the world left him alone. Until the day it didn't. It was late November when he found the wagon. He'd been checking his trap lines, moving through the dense pine forest with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of practice. The snow was deep, almost to his knees in places. But he knew these woods. Every ridge, every frozen creek, every animal path. He could navigate them blind if he had to. That's why the tracks caught his attention. Wagon wheels, deep ruts carved into the snow, heading west along a route that made no sense. Nobody with half a brain traveled this far into the mountains this late in the season. The pass would be closed within days, maybe hours. Whoever had come through here was either desperate or stupid. Probably both. Caleb stood there for a long moment, staring at those tracks. Every instinct told him to turn around. Not his problem, not his concern. People made bad choices all the time, and it wasn't his job to save them from their own foolishness. But something made him follow the tracks anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some buried piece of his humanity that hadn't frozen over yet. He told himself he'd just take a look, make sure nobody was stranded somewhere obvious, then head back to his cabin and forget the whole thing. The tracks led him deeper into the valley, winding through terrain that got rougher with every mile. Snow had covered most of the trail, but he could still make out where the wagon had struggled, where wheels had slipped, where the driver had made bad turn after bad turn. And then he found it. The wagon was on its side, half buried in a snowdrift at the bottom of a steep embankment. One wheel was shattered. The canvas cover had been torn away by wind, and everything inside was exposed to the freezing air. Supplies scattered everywhere. Broken crates, torn blankets, a smashed lantern leaking oil into the snow. Caleb approached slowly, scanning the scene. No movement. No sound except the wind. 2 bodies lay in the snow beside the wreckage. A man and a woman. Middle-aged, frozen solid. The man's arm was still outstretched like he'd been trying to reach for something when he died. The woman's face was turned toward the wagon, her expression locked in something that might have been fear or determination, or both. Caleb had seen plenty of dead people. The war had made sure of that. But something about this felt different. Worse, somehow. These weren't soldiers who'd chosen a fight. They were just people who'd made a bad decision and paid for it with everything. He was about to turn away when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper. Caleb's head snapped toward the wagon. He moved fast, climbing over the wreckage, throwing aside broken planks and frozen canvas. And there, tucked into the corner of the wagon bed beneath a pile of blankets, he found them. 2 children. A boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, curled around a younger girl who couldn't have been more than 5. Both of them were shaking violently, their lips blue, their skin pale as the snow around them. The boy's eyes were open, staring at Caleb with a mix of terror and something else, hope, maybe, or just the last desperate instinct to survive. "Please," the boy whispered. His voice was barely audible. "Please don't leave her." The girl wasn't conscious. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Caleb could see frost forming on her eyelashes. For a moment he didn't move. This wasn't his problem. These weren't his kids. He didn't know them, didn't owe them anything. The smart thing, the sensible thing, would be to ride to the nearest town, report what he'd found, let someone else handle it. By the time he got back with help, they'd probably be dead anyway. Clean, simple. Not his fault. But the boy was still looking at him, and Caleb heard himself say, "I've got you." He didn't know why he said it, didn't know why he peeled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the girl, didn't know why he lifted her out of the wagon with more care than he'd shown anything in years, didn't know why he turned to the boy and said, "Can you walk?" The boy nodded, though Caleb could see he was barely holding himself upright. "Stay close," Caleb said. "Don't fall behind." The trip back to the cabin should have killed them. The temperature was dropping fast, and the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke loose. Wind screamed through the trees, driving snow so thick Caleb could barely see 10 feet ahead. The girl was dead weight in his arms, and the boy stumbled constantly, falling every few hundred yards until Caleb had to half carry him too. It took 3 hours to cover 2 miles. By the time Caleb kicked open the cabin door, his entire body was numb. He laid the girl down near the fireplace, barking orders at the boy, "Get those wet clothes off her, wrap her in those blankets," while he worked to get a fire going. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely strike the flint, but finally, mercifully, the kindling caught. Heat filled the small cabin slowly, painfully. Caleb boiled water, forced the children to drink it, even when they choked and cried. He wrapped them in every blanket he owned, piled furs on top of them, kept the fire roaring until sweat dripped down his own back. The girl didn't wake up for 2 days. When she finally opened her eyes, she screamed. It was a sound Caleb would never forget, raw and terrified and utterly broken. She thrashed in the blankets, sobbing, calling for her mother in a voice that tore through the cabin like a knife. The boy tried to calm her. "Emma, it's okay. It's okay. I'm here." But she wouldn't stop screaming. Caleb stood there, useless, watching this kid try to hold his sister together while she fell apart. He didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to handle crying children or trauma or any of this. He was good at survival, at hunting, at being alone. Not this. Eventually, Emma exhausted herself and fell into a fitful sleep, still whimpering. The boy, Thomas, Caleb had learned, sat beside her, holding her hand, his face hollow. "They're dead, aren't they?" Thomas said quietly. "Our parents." Caleb could have lied, could have said something comforting, something soft, but he didn't know how to do that, so he just told the truth. "Yeah," he said, "they are." Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't cry, just stared at the fire. "What happens to us now?" he asked. Caleb didn't have an answer. For 3 days he kept them alive, fed them, warmed them, made sure they didn't die. That was the extent of his plan. He figured once the storm passed, he'd take them to town, hand them over to whoever was supposed to deal with orphaned children, and go back to his life. Simple. Except it wasn't simple. Because on the 4th day, the sheriff showed up. Caleb heard the horses before he saw them, 2 riders coming up the trail toward his cabin. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, and watched as Sheriff Dawson and his deputy dismounted. Dawson was a big man, gray-bearded and weather-worn, the kind of lawman who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. He nodded at Caleb. "Heard you pulled a couple kids out of the snow," Dawson said. "Word travels fast," Caleb muttered. "Trapper saw you carrying them back, told folks in town." Dawson looked past Caleb toward the cabin. "They alive?" "Yeah." "Good. I'm here to take them." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "Take them where?" "Territorial orphanage, down in Cheyenne." Dawson's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was talking about moving furniture. "It's the law. No parents, no family, they go to the orphanage." "They just lost their parents," Caleb said. "They're barely recovered." "I understand that, but I've got my orders." Dawson gestured toward the cabin. "Bring them out." Caleb didn't move. For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. The deputy's hand drifted toward his sidearm, and Caleb could feel the tension coiling tight. Then Thomas appeared in the doorway. "We're not going," the boy said. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. He stood there in clothes too big for him, his face still pale and thin, but his eyes were fierce. Dawson sighed. "Son, this isn't up to you." "We're not going," Thomas repeated. He looked at Caleb. "We want to stay here." Emma appeared behind him, clutching his shirt. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wide and terrified. Caleb felt something twist in his chest, something he didn't want to feel. "They stay with me," he heard himself say. Dawson raised an eyebrow. "You? You're not their kin. You're not even married. The law says—" "I don't care what the law says." "Caleb." Dawson's voice softened slightly. "I know you mean well, but you can't just keep them. They need a proper home, a family." "This is a home. It's a cabin in the middle of nowhere. You're a bachelor. You've got no legal right to these children." Dawson shook his head. "I'm sorry, I really am. But they have to come with me." "And if I say no?" The deputy's hand moved closer to his gun. Dawson held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You saved their lives. That's admirable. But this is where it ends." Caleb looked at the children. Thomas was shaking, whether from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. Emma had started crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. He thought about the war, about all the orders he'd followed, all the things he'd done because someone with authority told him it was necessary. About all the times he'd stayed silent when he should have spoken up. "Give me a week," Caleb said. Dawson frowned. "What?" "1 week. Let me figure something out." "Figure what out?" "I don't know yet, but give me a week." Dawson studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. 3 days. That's all I can give you. After that, I have to file the paperwork, and they go to Cheyenne. You understand?" Caleb nodded. 3 days, Dawson repeated. He mounted his horse, the deputy following. "Don't make me come back with a warrant, Caleb." They rode off, leaving Caleb standing in the snow with 2 children who weren't his, staring at a problem he had no idea how to solve. That night, he sat by the fire while the children slept. His mind churned through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He had no legal claim to them, no family connection, no money to hire a lawyer, even if one would help. And then Thomas spoke from the darkness. "You're going to give up on us, aren't you?" Caleb turned. The boy was sitting up, watching him with those 2 old eyes. "I'm trying to find a way," Caleb said. "But there isn't one." It wasn't a question. Thomas said it like a fact, like something he'd already accepted. "We're going to the orphanage, and they're going to separate us." "What?" "That's what they do. Boys in one place, girls in another." Thomas's voice was flat, emotionless. "I heard the sheriff talking about it once when we passed through town. Emma will go somewhere else, and I'll never see her again." Caleb felt that twist in his chest again, sharper this time. "I promised our parents I'd take care of her," Thomas continued, "right before they died. My pa said, 'Thomas, you watch over your sister.' And I said I would." He looked down at his hands. "But I can't, not if they split us up." Caleb didn't know what to say. "So yeah," Thomas said quietly, "I know you're going to give up. Everyone does eventually." The boy lay back down, turning his back to the fire. Caleb sat there for a long time, staring at the flames. He thought about his own parents, dead 15 years now, about the brother he'd lost in the war, about all the people he'd failed to save, all the promises he'd broken, all the times he'd chosen the easy path because it hurt less. And he thought about those 2 bodies in the snow, frozen in their last desperate attempt to protect their children. When morning came, Caleb made a decision. It was possibly the stupidest decision of his life, but he made it anyway. He woke the children, fed them a quick breakfast, then bundled them into warm clothes. "Where are we going?" Emma asked. It was the first full sentence she'd spoken since waking up. "Town," Caleb said. Thomas's face went pale. "You're taking us to the sheriff." "No, I'm taking you with me to fix this." "How?" Caleb picked up his rifle and headed for the door. "You'll see." The ride to town took most of the day. Caleb put the children on his horse, walking alongside to break trail through the deep snow. Neither of them spoke much. Emma fell asleep against Thomas's back, and Thomas just stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. By the time they reached town, the sun was setting. The main street was busy. Wagons rolling past, people hurrying to finish their business before full dark. Caleb led the horse toward the saloon, the biggest building in town, the place where everyone gathered when they wanted to be heard. "Stay close," he told the children, And don't talk unless I tell you to. He pushed open the saloon doors. The noise hit him like a wall. Laughter, shouting, the clatter of glasses and scrape of chairs. Smoke hung thick in the air. Every table was full, men gambling and drinking and arguing about everything from cattle prices to politics. Caleb walked to the center of the room, the children following behind him. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. Something about the way he stood, the way he looked, made people notice. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Within 30 seconds, the entire saloon had gone quiet. "I need a wife," Caleb said. Someone laughed, then someone else. Within moments, the whole room was roaring. "What'd he say?" "The hermit wants a wife." "Hell, Thorne, you're about 6 years late for that conversation." Caleb stood there, waiting for the laughter to die down. It took a while. Finally, the bartender, a man named Sullivan who'd known Caleb since before the war, spoke up. "You serious, Caleb?" "Dead serious." "Why?" Caleb gestured to the children. "Found them 4 days ago. Their parents died in the snow. The law says they go to an orphanage in Cheyenne unless I can prove I'm fit to raise them. Can't do that as a bachelor." The laughter stopped. Sullivan leaned on the bar. "So you want to get married, just like that?" "By morning," Caleb said. "That's the deadline the sheriff gave me. I need someone willing to stand in front of a judge and say they'll help me raise these kids. I'm not asking for love, not asking for anything permanent if you don't want it, just asking for help." Silence. Someone in the back muttered, "That's insane." "Probably," Caleb agreed, "but it's all I've got." He scanned the room. Most people were staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Some were shaking their heads. Others had already gone back to their drinks, dismissing the whole thing as a joke. Thomas tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "This won't work," he whispered. "Quiet," Caleb said, though he was starting to think the boy was right. Then a voice spoke from the corner. "I'll do it." Every head turned. A woman stood up from a table near the back. She was maybe 30, dark-haired, dressed in the plain, practical clothes of someone who worked for a living. Her face was lean, weathered, with eyes that had seen their share of hardship. Mara Hale. Caleb knew who she was. Everyone in town did. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago to a mining accident. No children. Lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. Took in sewing and laundry to survive. Kept to herself mostly, same as Caleb. She walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "You serious?" Sullivan asked her, echoing his earlier question. "As serious as he is," Mara said. She stopped a few feet from Caleb, looking him up and down. Then she looked at the children. Her gaze lingered on Emma, who was half hiding behind Thomas. "One question," Mara said. "All right. Will you be kind to them?" Caleb thought about that. He could have said yes immediately, could have given her whatever answer she wanted to hear, but something about the way she asked, the weight behind those words, made him pause. "I don't know how to be a parent," he said honestly. "I'm not good with people. I'm rough around the edges, and I'll probably mess up more than I get right. But I won't hurt them, and I won't quit on them. That's the best I can promise." Mara studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Good enough." The saloon erupted in noise, people shouting questions, arguing about whether this was legal, whether it was moral, whether Caleb and Mara had both lost their minds. But Caleb barely heard any of it. He was too busy trying to figure out what the hell he'd just agreed to. Mara turned to Sullivan. "Can you get Judge Morrison here tonight?" "Probably. Why?" "Because if we're doing this, we're doing it now. No sense waiting until morning if we don't have to." Sullivan shook his head but reached for his coat. "You're both crazy. You know that, right?" "Probably," Mara said, echoing Caleb's earlier response. As Sullivan headed out to find the judge, Mara crouched down in front of the children. "What are your names?" she asked gently. "Thomas?" the boy said warily. "This is Emma." "Hi, Thomas." "Hi, Emma." Mara's voice was soft, careful. "I know this is all very strange, and I know you don't know me, but I promise I'm going to do my best to help you, all right?" Emma didn't respond, but Thomas gave a small nod. Mara stood and looked at Caleb. "We should talk. Outside." They stepped out into the cold night air. leaving the children inside where it was warm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb asked finally. Mara wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the dark mountains in the distance. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know what it's like when nobody helps." She looked at him. "You really think you can raise them?" "No," Caleb admitted, "but I'm going to try anyway." "Good, because trying is all any of us can do." She paused. "I'm not looking for a husband, Caleb. I'm not looking for romance or a second chance at happiness or any of that. I buried those hopes with my husband, but I can't stand the thought of those kids being separated. So if this is what it takes to keep them together, then fine, we'll do it." "What happens after?" Caleb asked. "Assuming the judge even agrees to this." "I don't know. We figure it out as we go, I suppose." Mara glanced back toward the saloon. "But one thing needs to be clear. If we do this, if we stand in front of that judge and say we're married, then we commit to it. For as long as it takes. No backing out when it gets hard. No giving up on those kids. Agreed?" Caleb thought about Thomas's words from the night before. Everyone gives up eventually. "Agreed," he said. Judge Morrison arrived an hour later, grumbling about being dragged out of his warm house to deal with this nonsense. He was an old man, white-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for being fair but strict. "Explain this to me again," Morrison said, looking between Caleb and Mara. "You two want to get married, tonight, for the sole purpose of adopting these children." "That's right," Caleb said. Morrison turned to the children. "And you two, you want to stay with these people?" Thomas nodded. Emma just pressed closer to her brother. "Have you even known each other a full week?" Morrison asked Caleb. "No." "Do you have a suitable home?" I have a cabin. It's small, but it's solid." "What about income? How will you support them?" "Hunting, trapping. I've got enough saved to get through winter, and I can provide for 4 as well as I did for 1. Morrison shook his head. "This is highly irregular." "But is it legal?" Mara asked. The judge hesitated. "Technically, yes. If you're married, you can petition for guardianship, but I'm not convinced this is in the children's best interest." "With all respect, Judge," Mara said, her voice steady, "sending them to an orphanage where they'll be separated isn't in their best interest either. The orphanage is equipped to handle children. You're strangers to them." "Strangers who are willing to try," Caleb said. "That's more than the orphanage is offering." Morrison looked at him for a long time. Then he sighed. "If I marry you two tonight, I'm doing it with conditions. You'll have 6 months to prove you can provide a stable home for these children." 6 months. I'll be checking in regularly. One sign that they're being neglected or mistreated, and they go to Cheyenne. Understood?" "Understood," Caleb and Mara said in unison. "And if this marriage is a sham, if I find out you're just going through the motions to game the system, I'll dissolve it and send those kids away so fast your heads will spin." "It's not a sham," Mara said quietly. "We're doing this for real." Morrison grunted. "We'll see." He pulled out a small Bible and a sheet of paper. "Fine. Let's get this over with." The ceremony was brief and awkward. No flowers, no music, no guests except for the handful of people from the saloon who'd followed them outside to watch. Caleb and Mara stood facing each other in the freezing cold, repeating words that felt surreal. When Morrison pronounced them married, neither of them moved to kiss. They just shook hands, formal and stiff, like they'd completed a business transaction, which, in a way, they had. "Congratulations," Morrison said dryly. "Now comes the hard part." This said. He wasn't wrong. That night, they all went back to Caleb's cabin. Caleb, Mara, Thomas, and Emma. 4 strangers pretending to be a family because the alternative was unthinkable. Caleb showed Mara where she could sleep, his bed, which he gave up without argument. He'd take the floor. The children would share the small loft space above the main room. Nobody spoke much. They were all too exhausted, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. As Caleb lay on the hard floor, staring at the ceiling, he heard Mara moving around in the other room, heard Thomas whispering something to Emma, heard the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, and he wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. But for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. And somehow, against all logic, that felt like it might be worth something. Morning came too early. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around his cabin like they knew where everything was. For a moment, still half asleep, he thought he was dreaming. Then he remembered. He sat up, his back protesting from a night on the hard floor, and found Mara standing at his stove pouring water into the coffee pot. She'd already built up the fire, and she was wearing the same clothes from the night before, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb asked, his voice rough. She didn't look at him. "Habit. I've been waking up at dawn for 20 years, can't seem to break it." He stood, stretching the stiffness out of his shoulders. The cabin felt smaller with 4 people in it. Everything felt smaller. "Kids still asleep?" he asked. For now, the girl, Emma, she had nightmares. Woke up crying around 3. Thomas calmed her down. "You heard that? These walls aren't exactly thick." Mara set the pot on the stove, then finally turned to look at him. "We need to talk about how this is going to work." "All right. I'm not staying here forever," she said bluntly. "My house is in town. I've got work there, people who depend on me for laundry and mending. I can't just abandon that." Caleb nodded. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'll stay here during the week. Help with the kids, make sure the judge sees we're trying. But I need to go back to town on weekends to handle my business. That acceptable?" "If that's what you need." Mara folded her arms. "You're not going to argue?" "Why would I? You're doing me a favor. I'm not about to tell you how to do it." She studied him for a moment, like she was trying to figure out if he was serious. Then she nodded. "Fair enough. But we need ground rules. For the kids." "I'm listening." "They're traumatized. That little girl watched her parents die. The boy thinks he has to protect her from everything. They're not going to trust us overnight." Mara's voice was firm, almost clinical. "We can't yell at them, can't push them too hard, and we definitely can't make them feel like they're a burden." "I wasn't planning on any of that." "Good, because if I see you losing your temper with them, this arrangement ends. I don't care what the judge says." Caleb felt a flash of irritation. "You think I'd hurt them?" "I don't know you well enough to know what you'd do," Mara said. "That's the problem. We got married last night, and I don't even know if you've got a temper. Don't know if you drink. Don't know anything except that you live alone in the woods and apparently have a soft spot for orphans." "I don't drink," Caleb said, "and I don't hit kids, or women, or anyone who doesn't deserve it. And who decides who deserves it?" He met her eyes. "I do." The air between them felt tight, like a rope pulled too taut. Then Mara looked away. "Fine. But understand something. I'm not here to be your wife. I'm here to keep those kids together. That's all this is." "I know." "Do you? Because some men get ideas about what marriage means, what they're entitled to." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm not some men. You want separate sleeping arrangements? Fine. You want your own space? Fine. I didn't marry you because I wanted a wife. I married you because I made a promise to 2 kids who've already lost everything. So let's just focus on that and leave the rest of it alone." Mara's shoulders relaxed slightly. "All right then." The coffee started boiling, and she turned back to the stove. Caleb pulled on his boots, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To check the trap lines. I've got 3 days' worth of work backed up." "What about the kids?" "They're still asleep. You said you'd help with them. So help." He stepped outside before she could respond, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. The cold air hit his face like a slap, but he welcomed it. Needed it. Everything inside that cabin felt too complicated, too tangled. Out here things made sense. You set a trap, you checked it, you skinned whatever you caught. Simple, clean. He spent the morning working his trap lines, finding 2 rabbits and a fox. Not a bad haul. By the time he got back to the cabin, it was past noon and he could smell something cooking. Inside, Mara had reorganized half his supplies. Sacks of flour and beans were stacked neatly in the corner. His traps hung from pegs he didn't remember having. The children were sitting at the table, his only table, eating some kind of stew. "You rearranged everything," Caleb said. Mara looked up from the pot she was stirring. "It was a mess." I fixed it. It was organized my way. Your way was inefficient. Thomas glanced between them nervously, and Caleb forced himself to let it go. He set the rabbits and fox on the counter, pulling out his skinning knife. Not at the table, Mara said sharply. What? You're not skinning animals where we eat. Take it outside. Caleb stared at her. It's winter. It's freezing outside. Then work fast. He opened his mouth to argue, then saw Emma watching him with wide, frightened eyes. The girl looked like she was bracing for a fight. Caleb grabbed the carcasses and went back outside. He spent the next hour in the cold, skinning and cleaning his catch while his fingers went numb. When he came back in, Mara had food waiting for him. She didn't say anything, just set the bowl down and went back to whatever she was doing. They ate in silence. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Mara sat by the fire mending one of Thomas's shirts. Caleb was cleaning his rifle, the familiar work helping settle his nerves. This isn't going to work if we fight in front of them, Mara said quietly. I wasn't fighting. I was just trying to do my job. Your job is keeping them safe now, not just alive, safe. That means they need to feel like this place is stable, like the adults aren't going to tear each other apart. Caleb set down the rifle. You think I don't know that? I think you're used to being alone, used to doing things your way, so am I. She tied off a stitch, examining her work. But that changes now. We have to figure out how to live together without making those kids think they're the problem. They're not the problem. Then stop acting like I am. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. The first week was brutal. Not because of any single disaster, but because of 1,000 small conflicts that none of them knew how to handle. Caleb was used to silence. Mara filled every quiet moment with activity. She cooked, cleaned, reorganized, tried to establish routines that Caleb kept accidentally disrupting. He'd come in from checking traps at odd hours, track snow across floors she'd just swept, interrupt meal times she'd carefully planned. And the kids were caught in the middle, trying to figure out where they fit in this strange new arrangement. Thomas helped where he could, but he was still weak from the ordeal in the snow. He tired easily, and Caleb could see the frustration in the boy's face every time he had to stop and rest. Emma barely spoke. She'd sit in corners, watching everything with those enormous eyes, flinching at loud noises. On the third day, Caleb tried to teach Thomas how to split firewood. Hold the axe like this, T, he said, demonstrating. Keep your feet apart. Don't swing wild. Let the weight do the work. Thomas tried, but his arms were too thin, his grip too weak. The axe bounced off the log without splitting it. Again, Caleb said. Thomas tried again. Same result. You're not following through. Watch. Caleb split the log in one clean strike. Thomas stared at the pieces, then at his own hands. I can't do it, the boy said quietly. You can. You're just not trying hard enough. I am trying. Then try harder. Thomas's face went red. He raised the axe and brought it down with everything he had. The blade buried itself in the log but didn't split it. He yanked the axe free and tried again and again. His breathing got ragged, tears forming in his eyes from frustration and exhaustion. That's enough. Mara's voice cut through the clearing. She was standing in the doorway, her expression hard. He needs to learn, Caleb said. He needs to rest. Look at him. Caleb looked. Thomas was shaking, his face pale, sweat dripping despite the cold. Inside, Marque, Mara told the boy. Now. Thomas dropped the axe and went, not looking at Caleb. Mara walked over, picking up the axe. He's 9 years old. He nearly froze to death a week ago. What exactly did you think was going to happen? I thought he'd learn something useful. You thought you'd turn him into a man in one afternoon. She set the axe down. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? Because I don't know. I don't know how to do any of this. You start by not expecting a traumatized child to meet your standards. Mara's voice was sharp. He's not one of your soldiers, Caleb. He's a scared kid who just wants to feel like he's not failing everyone. I never said he was failing. You didn't have to say it. It was written all over your face. She went back inside, leaving Caleb standing there with the axe and a pile of unsplit wood. That evening, he found Thomas sitting in the loft, staring at nothing. Can I come up? Caleb asked. The boy shrugged. Caleb climbed the ladder, settling onto the floor beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally. "About earlier, I pushed too hard." Thomas didn't respond. "I don't know how to do this," Caleb admitted. "Being whatever I am to you, I only know how to survive, how to work. And I thought if I taught you that, it'd help. But Mara's right. You're not ready for that yet." "I want to help," Thomas said quietly. "I don't want to be useless." "You're not useless. I can't split wood, can't hunt, can't do anything." "You kept your sister alive," Caleb said. "In that wagon, in the cold, you kept her alive until I found you. That's not nothing." Thomas looked at him, surprised. "You're stronger than you think," Caleb continued. "But strength isn't just about swinging an axe. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're scared, even when you're exhausted. You've already proven you can do that." The boy's eyes were wet. "My pa used to say that. Sounds like he was a smart man." "He was." Thomas wiped his face. "I miss him." "I know." They sat there in the dimness of the loft, and for the first time Caleb felt like maybe he'd done something right. Downstairs, Emma screamed. Both of them scrambled down the ladder. Mara was already at Emma's side, the girl thrashing and sobbing, trapped in some nightmare. "Mama!" Emma cried. "Mama, please!" "Shh, sweetness, it's all right," Mara said, trying to hold her. But Emma fought her, wild and terrified. Thomas tried to help, but Emma didn't seem to see either of them. She was somewhere else, somewhere terrible. Caleb stood there, helpless. He'd faced down armed men without flinching, but this broke something in him. Finally, Emma exhausted herself, collapsing into Mara's arms, still whimpering. Mara held her, rocking slowly, murmuring soft words that Caleb couldn't quite hear. Thomas sat down beside them, taking his sister's hand. "I'm here, Em. I'm right here." Emma's breathing gradually slowed. Her eyes closed. Caleb backed away, giving them space. He went outside, needing air, needing distance from the rawness of that moment. The night was clear and bitterly cold. Stars filled the sky like scattered ice. He heard the door open behind him. Mara. "She asleep?" he asked. For now. Mara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. That happens most nights. "How do you stand it?" "What choice do I have? She's hurting. All we can do is be there when it gets too much." Caleb shook his head. "I don't know how to help with that. I can teach them to survive out here. Can teach them to work, to hunt, to stay alive in the winter. But I don't know how to fix what's broken inside them." "You can't fix it," Mara said. "Nobody can. Time might help. Stability might help. But they'll carry this with them forever. Then what's the point? The point is they carry it together, with people who care about them, instead of alone in some orphanage where nobody knows their names." She looked at him. "You did a good thing, Caleb, saving them." "Don't doubt that. Doesn't feel good. Feels like I'm in over my head." "You are. So am I. But we're doing it anyway." They stood there in the cold, two people who barely knew each other, tied together by a promise neither of them fully understood yet. A week after the wedding, Judge Morrison arrived for his first inspection. Caleb saw him coming from a mile away, riding up the trail with that same annoyed expression he'd worn the night of the ceremony. Mara was inside with the kids, and Caleb went to meet the judge outside. "Thorne," Morrison said, dismounting. "Judge, how's it going?" "We're managing." Morrison looked past him toward the cabin. "I'll need to see them, talk to them alone." "They're inside." The judge went in and Caleb followed. Mara stood quickly when she saw Morrison, brushing flour off her hands. The children were at the table working on something that looked like writing lessons. "Mrs. Thorne?" Morrison said with a nod. Mara blinked at the name. She still wasn't used to it, but recovered quickly. "Judge." "I'd like to speak with the children, privately, if you don't mind." Caleb and Mara exchanged a glance, then stepped outside. The door closed behind them. "Think they'll be all right?" Mara asked. "Morrison's not cruel. He's just doing his job." "His job is deciding whether we're good enough." "Then we better hope we are." Inside the cabin, Morrison pulled up a chair across from the children. Thomas sat rigid, protective. Emma pressed close to her brother's side. "Relax," Morrison said. "I'm not here to scare you. I just want to see how you're doing, honestly." Thomas didn't relax. "We're fine, You settling in all right? Getting enough to eat?" "Yes, sir." "And they're treating you well? Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Thorne?" Thomas hesitated, and Morrison leaned forward. "You can tell me the truth, son. If something's wrong—" "Nothing's wrong," Thomas interrupted. They're trying. It's weird, and it's hard, but they're trying." "Weird how?" "They don't really know each other, and they argue sometimes, but not mean, just about how to do things." Thomas glanced at Emma. "But they're nice to us. Mr. Thorne's teaching me stuff. Mrs. Thorne makes sure Emma eats." Morrison looked at Emma. "What about you, young lady? You like it here?" Emma didn't answer, just nodded, her face half hidden against Thomas's shoulder. "She doesn't talk much," Thomas explained. "But she's getting better. She smiled yesterday. First time since, Morrison studied them both. "You know I have to keep checking on you, making sure this arrangement is working. We know. And if it's not, if you're scared or if something changes, you tell me. Understand?" "Yes, sir." The judge stood. "All right, I'll talk to you again soon." Outside, Morrison found Caleb and Mara waiting in tense silence. "Well?" Caleb asked. "They seem stable. For now." Morrison pulled on his gloves. "But I'm not convinced this is sustainable long term. 4 people in a cabin this small, 2 of them traumatized children, 2 of you barely knowing each other. It's a powder keg." "We're making it work," Mara said. "Are you? Because from what I can see, you're 2 people play acting at being married, and those kids can tell. What do you want from us?" Caleb's voice was hard. "You want us to pretend we're in love? We're doing what we said we'd do, providing a home, keeping them together. That's what matters. What matters is those children's well-being, and I'm not sure this environment is healthy for them." "Healthier than an orphanage," Mara shot back. Morrison sighed. "I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, for now. But you've got 5 months left to prove this works. And I meant what I said. One sign that those kids are suffering, and this ends." He rode away, leaving Caleb and Mara standing in the snow. "He's right," Mara said quietly. "We are play acting. What else are we supposed to do? I don't know, but maybe we need to actually try being a family instead of just coexisting." "How?" She looked at him. "We start by not treating each other like enemies." That night, they made an effort. Caleb asked Mara about her life before the cabin. She told him about her late husband, about the mining accident that had killed him along with 6 other men, about how she'd spent the last 2 years just surviving day to day, never really living. "I thought I was done," she admitted, "with everything, with trying. And then you walked into that saloon, and I saw those kids, and something in me just woke up." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not children." Caleb told her about the war. Not the details. He never talked about the details, but the broad strokes. About coming home to nothing, about choosing solitude because it hurt less than connection. "I thought I'd stay out here until I died," he said. "Figured it'd be peaceful, quiet. And now? Now it's loud and chaotic, and I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time." Mara smiled slightly. "Welcome to parenthood." The weeks that followed were incremental. Small victories mixed with setbacks. Emma started eating more, though she still barely spoke. Thomas began helping with easier chores, gaining strength slowly. Caleb learned to be patient, not naturally, but through effort. Mara learned to give him space when he needed it. They were still strangers in many ways, still awkward around each other, still unsure what this relationship actually was. But they were trying, and the kids noticed. One evening, Thomas came down from the loft with a piece of paper. He'd drawn something, a rough sketch of the 4 of them standing in front of the cabin. Stick figures mostly, but recognizable. He handed it to Mara without a word. She looked at it for a long moment, then hung it on the wall beside the fireplace. "Thank you," she said softly. Thomas nodded and went back upstairs. But Caleb saw the smallest smile on the boy's face. Progress. Winter deepened, the snow piled higher. The temperature dropped until even Caleb hesitated before going outside. But inside the cabin, something was shifting. They established routines: breakfast at dawn, lessons for the kids in the morning, reading, writing, basic arithmetic that Mara taught while Caleb worked, afternoons for chores, evenings by the fire. It wasn't perfect. Emma still had nightmares. Thomas still carried too much responsibility on his thin shoulders. Caleb still struggled with patience. Mara still felt like an outsider in someone else's home. But they were becoming something. Not quite a family yet, but maybe the beginning of one. And then, on a day when the sun actually broke through the clouds and the world looked almost beautiful, everything nearly fell apart. Judge Morrison arrived unannounced, riding hard, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said. "Now." Inside the cabin, he laid out the problem. "I've received a formal complaint from the Territorial Children's Services. They're arguing that this arrangement is inappropriate, that the children should be in a proper facility with trained caregivers." "Based on what?" Mara demanded. "Based on the fact that you two barely knew each other when you got married, that this looks like a sham to circumvent the law. They're petitioning to have the children removed." Caleb felt ice in his stomach. "When?" "Hearings in 2 weeks, in Cheyenne. You'll both need to appear and make your case." "What case?" Caleb asked. "We're doing everything you asked, and I'll testify to that. But the committee doesn't answer to me. They'll make their own decision." Morrison looked between them. "You need to convince them this marriage is real, that you're actually building a life together. Because if they think this is just a legal maneuver, they'll separate those kids and there won't be anything I can do about it." After the judge left, Caleb and Mara sat in stunned silence. Finally, Thomas spoke from the loft. "We're going to lose, aren't we?" Caleb looked up. Both children were sitting there listening to everything. "No," he said, "we're not." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not giving up on you. Neither of us are." Thomas's face crumpled. "Everyone says that. But it doesn't matter what you want. It matters what they decide." Emma started crying, quiet tears that broke Caleb's heart. Mara climbed the ladder, gathering both children close. "Listen to me, both of you. We are going to fight for you, and we are going to win." "You can't promise that," Thomas said. "I can promise we'll try, with everything we have." That night, after the children finally slept, Caleb and Mara made a plan. They would go to Cheyenne. They would stand in front of that committee and make them understand. But to do that, they needed to be believable, needed to actually look like a married couple who cared about each other. "Can you do that?" Mara asked. "Pretend we're more than we are?" Caleb thought about it. "Maybe we don't have to pretend." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe somewhere in the last few weeks we became something real. Not love, not romance, but something." He looked at her. "I trust you with those kids. I trust you in my home. That's more than I've trusted anyone in a long time." Mara nodded slowly. "I feel the same about you." "Then that's what we show them. Not some fairy tale, just the truth. That we're two people who decided to build something together, for them." "You think that'll be enough?" "It has to be." The 2 weeks before the hearing passed too quickly. They prepared as best they could, rehearsing what they'd say, gathering documents, writing statements. Thomas helped, his face set with determination. Even Emma seemed to sense the importance, staying close to Mara, as if afraid she'd disappear. The night before they left for Cheyenne, Caleb couldn't sleep. He stood outside in the cold, staring at the dark mountains. Mara joined him, wrapped in a heavy blanket. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified." "Me too." They stood there together, not touching, just existing in the same space. "What happens if we lose?" Mara asked quietly. "We don't lose. But if we do, then we figure out another way. But we don't stop fighting." She looked at him. "You really mean that?" "I made a promise, to them, and to you, whether you believe it or not." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched since the wedding. "We'll do this together," she said. "Whatever happens." Caleb squeezed her hand. Together. Inside the cabin, Thomas watched them through the window, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself hope. The journey to Cheyenne took 3 days through weather that seemed determined to stop them. The wagon Caleb had borrowed rattled over frozen ruts, and the wind cut through even the thickest blankets. Emma huddled between Mara and Thomas in the back while Caleb drove, his face set against the cold. Nobody talked much. What was there to say? They all knew what was waiting at the end of this road. On the second night, they stopped at a boarding house in a small town whose name Caleb didn't bother learning. The woman who ran it looked at them with open curiosity, a rough mountain man, a quiet woman, and 2 hollow-eyed children who didn't look like they belonged to either adult. 2 rooms, Caleb said, setting coins on the counter. The woman counted them slowly. You're a ways from home. Just passing through. Where you headed? Cheyenne. Her eyebrows went up. In this weather? Must be important. Caleb didn't answer, just took the keys and headed upstairs. The rooms were small and cold, but they had real beds, which was more than they'd had for 2 nights. Mara got the children settled in one room, while Caleb stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. He could hear Emma crying softly through the thin walls, could hear Mara's gentle voice trying to soothe her. It's all right, sweetness. We're safe here, just for tonight. But Emma's crying didn't stop, and eventually Caleb heard Thomas join in. Quieter, more controlled, but there. The boy who always tried to be strong, finally breaking. Caleb turned away, heading back downstairs. The common room was empty except for the boarding house woman who was banking the fire for the night. Your kids all right? She asked. They're fine. Didn't sound fine. Caleb didn't respond. He went to the window, looking out at the dark street. The woman came over, wiping her hands on her apron. I don't mean to pry, but I've seen a lot of families come through here over the years, and I can tell when something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Those children are scared, and you look like a man heading to his own execution. She paused. If you need help, we don't. You sure about that? Caleb turned to face her. We're handling it. The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if you change your mind, there's folks in this territory who don't hold much truck with Cheyenne's rules. Just saying. She left him alone with that cryptic statement hanging in the air. Upstairs, Mara had finally gotten the children to sleep. She found Caleb still standing at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. You should rest, she said. Can't. Caleb? What if we lose tomorrow? The words came out rougher than he intended. What if we get there and they've already made up their minds? What if nothing we say matters? Mara crossed her arms. Then we find another way. There is no other way. You heard Morrison. If the committee rules against us, that's it. There's always another way. Her voice was firm. We could leave, take the kids and go somewhere they can't find us. Montana, maybe, or Oregon. That's kidnapping. That's keeping them together. Caleb shook his head. We'd be running forever, looking over our shoulders. And what kind of life is that for them? Better than being separated. Is it? Growing up with parents who are fugitives? Never staying in one place long enough to make friends or put down roots? He turned to face her. I won't do that to them. Then what will you do? I'll stand in front of that committee and tell them the truth. And hope it's enough. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could see the worry in her eyes. What if the truth isn't what they want to hear? Then at least we tried. She reached out, adjusting his collar without thinking, a gesture so automatic and familiar that it startled both of them. Her hand froze, and their eyes met. Sorry, she said, pulling back. You looked like you needed straightening. It's fine. But something had shifted between them. Something small, but real. We should sleep, Mara said. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Yeah. She started toward her room, then paused. Caleb, whatever happens tomorrow. Thank you for trying. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Cheyenne was bigger than any place Caleb had been since the war. Buildings crowded together, streets full of wagons and people moving with purpose. The noise was overwhelming after months of mountain silence. Thomas stared out the wagon with wide eyes. Even Emma seemed alert, taking in the unfamiliar sights. "Stay close," Mara told them. "Don't wander." The Territorial Administration Building was an imposing structure at the center of town, 3 stories of brick and authority. Caleb tied off the wagon, and they all climbed down, standing together on the sidewalk. "Ready?" Mara asked. Nobody answered. They just walked inside. The hearing room was smaller than Caleb expected. A long table at one end where 3 people sat, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in formal clothes that screamed bureaucracy. Judge Morrison was already there, sitting off to the side. He gave Caleb a small nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," the woman at the center said. She was maybe 50, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too many sad stories. "I'm Mrs. Fletcher. This is Mr. Garrison and Mr. Webb. We're here to determine whether your current guardianship of Thomas and Emma Reynolds should continue." Caleb and Mara sat in the chairs indicated. The children sat behind them, and Caleb could feel Thomas's tension, like a physical thing. Mrs. Fletcher opened a folder. "Let's begin with the basic facts. You 2 were married on December 3rd, is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Mara said. "And you'd known each other how long before that?" "We'd met a few times in town over the years," Mara said carefully, "but we didn't know each other well. So this was, essentially, a marriage of convenience." "It was a marriage of necessity," Caleb said, "for the children's sake." Mr. Garrison leaned forward. He was younger, with a sharp face and sharper eyes. "And that's exactly the problem, Mr. Thorne. You're asking us to believe that 2 strangers decided to marry and take on the responsibility of raising traumatized children out of the goodness of your hearts. It strains credulity." "We're not asking you to believe anything," Caleb said. "We're showing you what we've done. Those kids are alive. They're healthy. They're being cared for." "In a 1-room cabin in the wilderness," Garrison shot back, "with no access to proper schooling, no medical care, no community support. Is that really what's best for them? It's better than splitting them up, is it? The Territorial Orphanage has trained staff, educational programs, proper facilities, and it would separate them," Mara interrupted. "Thomas in one building, Emma in another. They'd maybe see each other once a month if they're lucky." "You want to tell me that's better?" Mrs. Fletcher held up a hand. "Let's stay focused. Mr. Thorne, can you describe your qualifications for raising children?" "I don't have qualifications. I have commitment." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Caleb met her eyes. "I'm not a teacher. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a man who found 2 kids dying in the snow and decided they deserved better than that. And I'm doing my best to give it to them." Mr. Webb, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. He was older, with kind eyes that reminded Caleb of his father. "Mrs. Thorne, what about you? What made you agree to this arrangement?" Mara took a breath. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. And since then, I've been existing, just going through the motions. When I saw those children in that saloon, saw what they needed, something in me woke up. I realized I could either keep hiding from life, or I could do something that mattered." "And you believe raising someone else's children matters?" "I believe keeping a family together matters, even if that family looks different than what you're used to." Mrs. Fletcher made a note. "Judge Morrison, you've been overseeing this arrangement. What's your assessment?" Morrison stood. "I'll be honest. When Caleb came to me with this plan, I thought he was crazy, thought there was no way it would work. But I've been checking on them regularly, and what I've seen is progress. The children are adjusting. They're learning. The Thorns are providing a stable home." "Stable?" Garrison scoffed. "They barely know each other. They know each other better now than they did, and they're learning. Isn't that what we ask of any parents? To learn as they go?" "These aren't typical circumstances." "No, they're not," Morrison agreed. "But sometimes unusual circumstances require unusual solutions. And from where I sit, this solution is working." Mrs. Fletcher turned to the children. "Thomas, Emma, would you like to say anything?" Thomas stood slowly. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "They're trying their best. I know it's weird. I know they didn't plan this. But they haven't quit on us. Not once. Do you feel safe with them?" Webb asked gently. Yeah, I mean, Mr. Thorne's kind of rough sometimes, and Mrs. Thorne worries too much, but they're good to us. They feed us and teach us, and they're there when Emma has nightmares." His voice cracked. Nobody else wanted to do that. Emma stood next to her brother, not speaking, but she reached out and took Mara's hand. The gesture was small, but it said everything. Mrs. Fletcher looked at that joined hand for a long moment. Then she closed her folder. "We'll deliberate and deliver our decision within the hour. You're all dismissed." The waiting was agony. They sat in a small antechamber, none of them speaking. Emma had fallen asleep against Mara's shoulder. Thomas stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. Caleb paced like a caged animal until Mara told him to sit down because he was making everyone nervous. "Sorry," he muttered, dropping into a chair. "It'll be all right," Mara said, though she didn't sound convinced. "You don't know that." "I'm choosing to believe it anyway." Judge Morrison came in, looking tired. "They're still talking. Could go either way." "What's your read?" Caleb asked. "Webb's on your side, Fletcher's undecided, Garrison's determined to send them to the orphanage. So we need Fletcher." "You need Fletcher." Morrison sat down. "For what it's worth, I think you made a good case in there. Didn't feel like it. You were honest. That counts for something." The door opened. A clerk stepped out. "They're ready?" Back in the hearing room, the 3 committee members looked grim. Mrs. Fletcher stood. "We've reached a decision," she said. "This was not an easy determination. The circumstances are highly irregular, and there are legitimate concerns about whether this arrangement serves the children's best interests." Caleb felt Mara's hand find his under the table. He gripped it tight. "However," Fletcher continued, "we've also seen evidence that the Thornes are providing adequate care and that the children themselves wish to remain in their custody. Therefore, we've decided to continue the guardianship on a provisional basis." Relief flooded through Caleb so fast it made him dizzy. "But understand this," Fletcher said, her voice hard. "You have 6 months. 6 months to prove this family is viable. We'll conduct regular inspections. Any sign of neglect, any indication that the children are suffering, and this arrangement ends immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Caleb and Mara said together. "One more thing." Fletcher's eyes moved to the children. "We're also mandating that you provide proper education for Thomas and Emma. Judge Morrison will ensure that curriculum materials are delivered to your home, and we expect documented progress." "We can do that," Mara said quickly. "See that you do." Fletcher sat down. "You're dismissed." Outside, the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Caleb felt like he could breathe for the first time in days. Thomas looked up at him. "We won?" "For now." "For now is enough," Mara said, squeezing the boy's shoulder. They stayed in Cheyenne one more night before heading back. Caleb used some of his precious savings to buy them a real dinner at a restaurant, the first meal any of them had eaten at a real table in weeks. Emma actually smiled when the food came, a quick flash of something like joy that disappeared as fast as it came. But it had been there. Caleb had seen it. That night, lying in yet another rented bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about the 6 months stretching ahead. 6 months to prove they were a family. 6 months to make it real. The trip back to the cabin was easier despite the cold. They had hope now, fragile as it was. The children talked more. Emma even hummed a little tune Mara had taught her. But when they finally reached the cabin, when Caleb pushed open the door expecting to find everything as they'd left it, his blood went cold. Someone had been inside. Supplies were scattered, furniture overturned. The drawing Thomas had made, the one Mara had hung on the wall, was torn in half and lying on the floor. "Stay outside, Caleb," Caleb told them, his voice sharp. He grabbed his rifle from the wagon and moved through the cabin carefully. No one was there now, but they'd left a message. Written in ash on the wall, "Leave or else." Mara appeared in the doorway despite his order. She saw the message and went pale. Who would do this? I don't know, but he had suspicions. There were people in these mountains who didn't like outsiders, who saw Caleb as someone who didn't belong. And now he'd brought more people, more complications. Thomas and Emma came in, and Emma started crying when she saw the mess. "It's all right," Mara said, gathering her close. "It's just things. We'll clean it up." But Thomas was staring at the message on the wall, his face hard. "They want us gone. They want us scared," Caleb corrected. "There's a difference." "Are we leaving?" Caleb looked at the boy, then at the mess, then at that hateful message. Every instinct told him to pack up and run. Find somewhere safer, somewhere easier, but running was giving up, and he'd promised not to do that. "No," he said. "We're not leaving. This is our home." "But," I said no. Caleb's voice was firm. "Whoever did this wants to scare us off. I'm not giving them the satisfaction." They spent the rest of the day cleaning. Caleb scrubbed the message off the wall while Mara sorted through the scattered supplies. Some things were ruined, flour spilled everywhere, blankets slashed, but most of it was salvageable. That night, Caleb stayed up with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness outside. He didn't expect whoever had done this to come back. They'd made their point, but he wasn't taking chances. Around midnight, Mara came down from the loft. "You should sleep," Caleb said. "So should you." "I will, later." She sat down beside him. "You think they'll come back?" "No. Cowards like that don't usually show their faces twice." "But you're staying up anyway." "Just being careful." They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the pines. "Thomas asked me something tonight," Mara said quietly. "He asked if we were really staying, if we meant it." "What'd you tell him?" "I said yes, but I'm not sure he believed me." Caleb looked at her. "Did you mean it?" "Yes." "Did you?" "Yeah, I did." "Even after this?" She gestured at the cabin. "Especially after this. I'm not letting some coward chase us off." Mara nodded slowly. "Good. Because I meant what I said in Cheyenne. We're in this together, whatever comes." "Together," Caleb agreed. The next few weeks were tense. Caleb watched the tree line constantly, expecting trouble. But nothing happened. No more messages, no more threats, just the usual mountain silence. Slowly, they fell back into their routines. Mara taught the children their lessons, using the materials Judge Morrison had sent. Thomas was a quick learner, soaking up knowledge like he'd been starved for it. Emma was slower, more hesitant, but she was trying. Caleb taught them other things: how to read animal tracks, how to tell if ice was safe to walk on, how to start a fire with damp wood, practical things that might keep them alive out here. And somewhere in all of that, something shifted. They stopped feeling like four separate people coexisting and started feeling like something more connected. Not perfect, not smooth, but real. One evening, Caleb came back from checking traps to find Mara laughing. Actually laughing. Thomas had told some joke that Caleb didn't understand, but the sound of Mara's laughter, genuine and unguarded, stopped him in his tracks. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard that sound in his home. Emma noticed him standing there and waved. Just a small gesture, but it was the first time she'd acknowledged him without fear in her eyes. Progress. But progress was fragile, as they learned a few days later. It started when Emma found a doll in the wagon, one of the few possessions that had survived from her old life. It was battered and dirty, but she clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold. "Look," she whispered to Thomas. "Mama gave me this." Thomas's face crumpled. "I remember." And just like that, the wound was open again. Emma started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas tried to comfort her, but he was crying too, both of them overwhelmed by grief that had been buried under survival. Mara moved toward them, but Emma pulled away. "I want my mama," the girl sobbed. "I want my real mama, not you, not you." The words hit Mara like a physical blow. Caleb saw her flinch, saw the hurt flash across her face before she hit it. "I know, sweetness," Mara said, her voice shaking. "I know you do." "Why did she leave me? Why did she leave?" "She didn't want to leave. She didn't choose. I want her back," Emma was screaming now, hysterical. "I want her back. I want her back." Thomas was sobbing too, trying to hold his sister, trying to keep her together while falling apart himself. The cabin felt too small for all this pain. Caleb stood frozen, completely out of his depth. This wasn't something he could fix with work or determination. This was grief, raw and bottomless, and it was swallowing them whole. Mara tried again to reach for Emma, but the girl thrashed away, running to the corner and curling into a ball, still clutching that doll. "Emma, leave me alone," the girl shrieked. "I hate you. I hate this place. I want to go home." Mara stood there, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned and fled outside. Caleb found her behind the cabin, leaning against the wall, crying into her hands. "She didn't mean it," he said. "Yes, she did. And she's right to feel that way. I'm not her mother. I'll never be her mother." "You're trying to be." "It's not enough." Mara's voice broke. "I can't replace what she lost. None of this can replace what they lost." Caleb didn't know what to say. She was right. They couldn't fix this, couldn't make it better. "So what do we do?" he asked. "I don't know." Mara wiped her eyes. "Maybe they were right. Maybe the orphanage would be better. Maybe we're just making it worse by pretending we can be their parents when we're clearly not." "Stop." Caleb's voice was sharp. "Don't do that. Don't give up on them because it got hard." "This isn't just hard, Caleb. This is impossible. We can't heal them. We can't bring back what they lost." "No, but we can be here. When they fall apart, we can be here. That's all we can do." "Is it enough?" "I don't know, but it's what we've got." Inside, Emma had cried herself into exhaustion. She sat in that corner, still holding the doll, her face swollen and red. Thomas sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Caleb and Mara came back in quietly. Nobody spoke. They just existed together in the wreckage of this moment. Eventually, Emma's breathing slowed. She looked up at Mara with wet, wounded eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to be sorry," Mara said, her voice gentle. "I was mean. You were honest, and that's all right. You're allowed to miss your mama. You're allowed to be angry and sad and all of it." Emma's lip trembled. "But I hurt your feelings." "My feelings will heal. What matters is you." The girl stood on shaky legs, then crossed the room and buried her face in Mara's dress. Mara held her, rocking slowly, and Caleb saw her crying again, but different this time. Not from hurt, from something deeper. Thomas looked at Caleb, his face exhausted. "Is she going to be okay?" "Eventually," Caleb said. "You both will be." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here, because you're still fighting. That's all that matters." That night was a turning point, though none of them realized it at the time. They'd hit bottom together and somehow come through the other side. Not healed, not whole, but still together. And in the days that followed, something changed. Emma started talking more. Not constantly, but enough that they could hear her voice becoming part of the cabin's soundscape. Thomas smiled occasionally, real smiles that reached his eyes. Mara and Caleb stopped tiptoeing around each other. They argued sometimes, about how to teach the kids, about chores, about everything and nothing, but the arguments felt different now. Less like strangers fighting and more like partners figuring things out. One morning, Caleb woke to find Mara already up, cooking breakfast. She'd tied back her hair and was humming something under her breath. "Morning," he said. She looked over and smiled. "Morning, coffee's ready." He poured himself a cup and sat at the table. Emma was still asleep in the loft, but Thomas was outside splitting kindling, slowly, carefully, using the technique Caleb had taught him. "He's getting better at that," Mara observed. "Yeah, he is. You're good with him, teaching him things. You're good with Emma, getting her to open up." Mara set a plate of eggs in front of him. "We make a decent team." "Yeah," Caleb said, looking at her. "We do." And standing there in that small cabin with winter pressing in from all sides, with 2 broken children slowly healing, with 6 months ticking down like a clock they couldn't stop, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope, Caleb learned, was a fragile thing in the Wyoming mountains. 2 weeks after Emma's breakdown, a storm rolled in that made the previous winter weather look gentle. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. Wind howled through the valley like something alive and angry. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being poured. They were trapped inside for 4 days straight. By the second day, everyone was getting restless. The cabin felt like it was shrinking. Thomas paced. Emma whined. Even Mara, usually patient, snapped at Caleb for tracking snow inside. "I was checking the roof," he said. "You could have taken your boots off first. I was outside for 30 seconds. And now there's a puddle in the middle of the floor." Caleb bit back a response and went to find a rag. This was the reality of 4 people living in close quarters. Every small thing became magnified. By the third day, they'd run through most of the activities they could do inside. Lessons, games, stories. Thomas had started teaching Emma her letters using charcoal on pieces of bark, and she was actually learning, but even that got old after hours of repetition. "I'm bored," Emma announced for the 20th time. "We all are," Thomas muttered. "Can we go outside?" "Not in this," Caleb said from where he was mending a harness. "You'd freeze before you made it 10 feet. But I want to play. Play inside." "There's nothing to do inside." Mara looked up from the shirt she was patching. "Emma, we've talked about this. The storm will pass. You need to be patient." "I don't want to be patient. I want to go outside." "Well, you can't." Emma's face scrunched up, and Caleb braced himself for tears. But instead, the girl stood up and stomped to the corner where she'd slept, throwing herself down with dramatic force. "I hate it here," she said to the wall. Nobody responded. What was there to say? On days like this, Caleb kind of hated it here too. That night, with the storm still raging, they all lay in their separate spaces listening to the wind. Caleb couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault, and he kept thinking about the roof, about whether the walls would hold, about all the things that could go wrong. He heard movement from the loft. Thomas, climbing down quietly. "Can't sleep either?" Caleb asked. The boy shook his head. "Emma's having nightmares again, but she won't wake up." "Want me to try?" "Mara's with her. I just needed—" Thomas trailed off, sitting by the dying fire. "I needed out of there for a minute." Caleb joined him, adding another log to the coals. Flames caught, pushing back the darkness. "This is hard, isn't it?" Thomas said. "Harder than you thought it would be." "Yeah." "You ever regret it, taking us in?" Caleb considered lying, then decided the boy deserved honesty. "Sometimes. When it gets really hard, and I remember what my life used to be like, quiet, simple." He paused. "But then I think about where you'd be if I hadn't, and I can't regret it. We'd be in Cheyenne, separated." "Exactly." Thomas stared into the fire. "I think about my parents every day, what they'd think of all this, if they'd be happy we're here or angry that we're with strangers. What do you think they'd want? For us to be together. That's what Pa said, right before." The boy's voice caught. He said, "Stay together, no matter what." But I don't know if this is what he meant. Sometimes staying together means accepting help from unexpected places. Is that what you and Mara are? Unexpected help? I guess so. Thomas nodded slowly. "She's nice, Mara. She tries really hard." "She does. And you're trying too, even though you don't always know what you're doing." Caleb almost smiled. "That obvious, huh?" "Yeah, but it's okay. Nobody really knows what they're doing, I think. They just pretend better." Upstairs, Emma's whimpering had stopped. Mara came down, looking exhausted. "She's settled?" Caleb asked. Finally. She dreamed about the wagon again, about being cold. Mara sat heavily in a chair. "I don't know how to make those dreams stop." "You can't," Thomas said quietly. "They just have to stop on their own, eventually." Mara looked at him with something like heartbreak in her eyes. "You have them too?" "Every night, just different ones." "What do you dream about?" Thomas hesitated, trying to keep Emma warm, trying to wake up Ma and Pa, even though I knew they were already gone, watching Mr. Thorne walk away and leave us there. "But I didn't," Caleb said. "I know, but in the dream, you always do, and then we freeze." The 3 of them sat there in the firelight, each carrying their own weight of trauma and fear and exhaustion. "This storm can't last forever," Mara said finally. "Things will get better once we can get outside again." She was right. On the 5th day, the storm broke. The world emerged white and glittering, transformed into something beautiful and deadly. Drifts reached the cabin's eaves in places. Trees were bent under the weight of snow. But the sun was out, and that made everything feel possible again. Caleb spent the morning digging paths, to the woodpile, to the stream, to the small shed where they kept tools. Thomas helped, his skinny arms working the shovel with determination. "You're getting stronger," Caleb observed. "Mara's been making me eat more. Says I was too thin." "She's right. I know, but I don't like being told what to do." "Nobody does. But sometimes the people telling you what to do actually know better." Thomas gave him a skeptical look. "You believe that?" "When it comes to Mara and food, yeah, she knows what she's doing." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Thomas asked, "Are you and Mara really married? Or is it just for show?" Caleb leaned on his shovel. "Why do you ask?" "Because you don't act like married people. You sleep in different rooms. You don't—" Thomas's face reddened. "You know. We got married to keep you and Emma together. That part was strategy. But somewhere along the way it became real. Not the way you're thinking, maybe, but real." "So you care about her?" "Yeah, I do." "Does she care about you?" "You'd have to ask her." Thomas considered this. "I think she does. She worries about you when you're out late, and she talks about you different than she talks about other people." "Different how?" "Like you matter." That simple statement hit Caleb harder than he expected. He cleared his throat and went back to shoveling. Inside, Mara was teaching Emma how to make bread. The girl's hands were covered in flour, and she was actually laughing at the mess she'd made. "Like this?" Emma asked, kneading the dough with exaggerated effort. "Gentler. You're not fighting it, you're working with it. But it's sticky." "That means it's right. Here, let me show you again." Caleb watched from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. This was the first time he'd heard Emma laugh, really laugh, since they'd found her. Mara looked up and caught him watching. She smiled, and something in Caleb's chest tightened. "We're making bread," Emma announced proudly. "I can see that." "Want to help?" "I don't know how." "Mara can teach you. She's a good teacher." So Caleb found himself at the table, his rough hands covered in flour, trying to knead dough while Emma giggled at his clumsy efforts. "You're terrible at this," Mara said, but she was smiling. "I'm a hunter, not a baker." Clearly. But she moved closer, guiding his hands, showing him the rhythm of it, and Caleb became acutely aware of how near she was, of the warmth of her beside him, of the easy way she'd invaded his space. "There," she said. "See? You're getting it." He wasn't getting it, but he nodded anyway, because standing here with her and Emma, making bread in a warm cabin while Thomas worked outside and the world was quiet and clean with fresh snow, this felt like something worth protecting. That night, they ate the bread Emma had helped make, and the girl was so proud she could barely contain herself. She kept asking everyone if it was good, and they all assured her it was the best bread they'd ever tasted. "Better than mine?" Mara asked, pretending to be offended. "The same as yours," Emma said diplomatically, "because we made it together." Later, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Mara sat by the fire again. It had become their routine, these quiet hours after everyone else had gone to bed, when they could actually talk without little ears listening. "She called me Ma today," Mara said softly. "Just once. I don't think she realized she did it, but she said, 'Ma, can you help me?' And then she caught herself and went red. 'What did you do?' Acted like I didn't notice. Helped her with whatever she needed, but—" Mara's voice was thick with emotion. "It meant something to hear that word. You're becoming her mother, whether she's ready to admit it or not. I'm not replacing her real mother. No, but you're becoming something to her, something important." Mara wiped her eyes. "What about you and Thomas? He follows you around like a shadow lately." "He's learning, that's all." "It's more than that. He looks up to you." "He shouldn't. I'm barely keeping my head above water most days." "So is every parent," Mara said. "The difference is you're honest about it." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Mara asked, "What happens when the 6 months are up? Assuming the committee lets us keep them, what then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, do we continue this? Stay married? Or do we figure out some other arrangement?" Caleb hadn't let himself think that far ahead. "What do you want?" "I don't know. This wasn't supposed to be forever, but now that we're in it," she trailed off. "It doesn't feel temporary anymore." "No, it doesn't. So maybe we should talk about what this actually is, what we are to each other." "I care about you, sis," Caleb said bluntly. "I respect you. I trust you with those kids and with this life we're building. If that makes us friends or partners or whatever else, I don't know. But it's real." Mara looked at him for a long moment. "I feel the same way. And I think that's enough. For now." "For now," Caleb agreed. The weeks turned over. February came, bitter and unforgiving. Judge Morrison made another inspection, this time bringing the curriculum supervisor who tested Thomas and Emma on their lessons. Thomas passed easily. Emma struggled with some of the questions, but the supervisor seemed satisfied with her progress. "They're doing well," the woman told Caleb and Mara. "Better than I expected, honestly. The boy's quite bright." "He reads everything he can get his hands on," Mara said proudly. "And the girl?" "She's coming along. She was nearly silent when we got her. Now she talks, laughs, participates. That's progress." The supervisor made notes in her book. "I'll report favorably. Keep doing what you're doing." After she left, Morrison lingered. "Committee meets again in April. That's when they'll make their final decision." "2 more months, Caleb said. 2 more months. But between you and me, I think you're going to be fine. You've proven yourselves. We've gotten lucky." "Luck has nothing to do with it. You've worked hard, both of you." Morrison tipped his hat. "Keep it up." But luck, as it turned out, did have something to do with it, because a week later, Emma got sick. It started as a cough. Nothing serious, Caleb thought. Kids got coughs, but it got worse fast. By the second day, she was burning with fever, struggling to breathe. Her small body racked with shivers, despite every blanket they piled on her. Mara stayed by her side constantly, trying everything she knew. Cool cloths for the fever, warm broth to keep her strength up, teas made from herbs she'd brought from town. Nothing helped. "We need a doctor," Mara said on the 3rd day. "Nearest doctor is in town. That's a day's ride in good weather." "Then you need to go." Caleb looked outside. Another storm was coming. He could feel it in the air. "If I leave now, I might not make it back for days." "If you don't leave now, she might die." The words hung between them like a physical thing. "I'll go," Thomas said from the loft. "I'm lighter. I can ride faster." "Absolutely not," Caleb said. "But no, you stay here. Help Mara. I'll go." He prepared quickly, packing supplies, saddling the horse. Mara caught him before he left. "Be careful," she said. "I will." "Caleb." Her hand found his. "Please hurry." He squeezed her hand and left. The ride to town was brutal. The storm hit halfway there, and Caleb pushed the horse as hard as he dared through blinding snow. By the time he reached town, both he and the animal were half frozen. He found Doc Brennan at home, a gray-haired man who looked annoyed at being interrupted during dinner. "I need you to come with me," Caleb said without preamble. "Now? In this weather?" "A little girl is dying, now." Brennan looked at the storm outside, then at Caleb's face. "How far?" 3 hours in good weather, longer in this. That's suicide. She's 6 years old. She has a fever that won't break and she can barely breathe. If you don't come, she'll die. So we're leaving, whether you're with me or not." Brennan cursed. "Give me 5 minutes to pack my bag." The ride back was worse than the ride out. The storm intensified, and Brennan's horse struggled in the deep snow. They had to stop twice to rest the animals, and each delay felt like a knife in Caleb's gut. What if they were too late? What if Emma died while he was out here freezing in the dark? "Tell me about her," Brennan said during one of the stops. "The sick girl." "Her name's Emma. She's 6, lost her parents 2 months ago. She's been through hell, and she's just starting to come out of it. She has to be all right. I'll do everything I can." They reached the cabin just before dawn. Caleb burst through the door to find Mara still sitting with Emma, who looked worse than when he'd left. Her breathing was shallow and ragged. Her skin was gray. Thomas stood off to the side, his face terrified. "Doctor's here," Caleb said. Brennan moved quickly, examining Emma with efficient hands. He listened to her chest, checked her pulse, looked at her throat. "Pneumonia," he said grimly. "Bad case." "Can you help her?" Mara's voice shook. "Maybe, but it's going to be rough. I need hot water, clean cloths, and everyone needs to stay out of my way." They worked through the day and into the night. Brennan gave Emma medicine, used strange devices to help her breathe, monitored her constantly. Mara helped, following his instructions without question. Caleb kept the fire going and the water hot, and tried not to fall apart. Thomas sat in the corner, watching everything, his face pale. "She'll be okay," Caleb told him, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "You don't know that." "No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway." By the second day, Emma's fever broke. She opened her eyes, weak and confused, but alive. "Hey, sweetness," Mara said, her voice cracking. "You're going to be okay." Emma tried to speak but couldn't. Brennan gave her water, just small sips. "The worst is past," he said, "but she needs rest. Lots of it. And she can't be out in the cold for weeks, maybe months." "She won't be," Caleb promised. Brennan stayed 2 more days, making sure Emma was stable. Before he left, he pulled Caleb aside. "That was close. Another day. And I don't think I could have saved her. But you did. This time. But she's fragile, both of them are. They've been through trauma, and their bodies are still recovering. You need to be careful with them." "We will be." Brennan nodded. "You're doing a good thing here, Thorne, taking care of those kids. Don't let anyone tell you different." After the doctor left, the cabin settled into a new routine centered around Emma's recovery. She spent most of her time sleeping, and when she was awake, she was quiet and weak. But she was alive. One afternoon, a week after she'd gotten sick, Emma woke from a nap and found Mara sitting beside her. "Ma?" she said, the word coming out naturally this time. Mara's breath caught. "Yes, sweetness?" "I'm sorry I scared you. You didn't mean to. You just got sick. But you were scared. I could tell. I was terrified, but you're getting better now, and that's what matters." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I love you." 3 simple words, but they shattered something in Mara. She pulled Emma close, carefully so as not to hurt her, and cried into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much." From across the cabin, Caleb watched. Thomas was beside him, also watching, also crying quietly. "We're really a family now, aren't we?" the boy said. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, I think we are." March came in cold but clear. Emma continued to improve, gaining strength day by day. By mid-month, she was up and walking around the cabin, though she tired easily. Thomas had grown almost 2 inches since they'd found him. His face had filled out, lost that hollow look. He was reading books Mara had borrowed from town, adventure stories and history, and anything he could get his hands on. One evening, Caleb was outside chopping wood when Thomas came out to help. "You don't have to," Caleb said. "I want to. Besides, you need help. This pile won't split itself." They worked together, and Caleb noticed how much stronger the boy had gotten, how much surer his swings were. "You've been practicing," Caleb observed. "Every day. When you're out checking traps, I want to be useful. You're useful. I want to be more useful. I want to help take care of Emma and Mara, like you do." Caleb stopped working. "Thomas, you're 10 years old. You shouldn't have to worry about taking care of everyone." "But I do worry, and I want to help." "You help plenty, but you also need to just be a kid sometimes. Read your books, play with your sister. Don't grow up too fast." Thomas leaned on his axe. "I don't think I have a choice. I grew up the day my parents died." The truth of that statement hurt to hear. "Maybe," Caleb said, "but that doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone. That's what family is for. We carry things together." "Is that what we are? Family?" "Yeah, I think so." Thomas nodded slowly. Then, quietly, he said, "Can I call you Pa?" Caleb felt something in his chest break open. If you want to. I want to, if that's okay. It's more than okay. They went back to splitting wood, but everything felt different now. Heavier, more real. That night, sitting by the fire, Mara noticed the change in Caleb. "What happened?" she asked. "Thomas asked if he could call me Pa." Mara smiled. "What did you say?" "I said yes. Was that right?" "Of course it was right. You are his father now, in every way that matters." "I don't feel like a father." "What do you feel like?" Caleb thought about it. "Like someone who's trying really hard not to mess this up." "That's what being a parent is," Mara said. "Trying really hard not to mess it up, and sometimes messing it up anyway, and then trying again." She moved closer to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We've made something good here," she said. "Despite everything, despite how it started and how hard it's been, we've made something worth keeping." "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "We have." They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, comfortable in each other's presence. And somewhere in that silence, Caleb realized something. He wasn't alone anymore. Hadn't been for months. He had a family, and he was never letting them go. April came with the committee's final decision hanging over them like an axe waiting to fall. Judge Morrison arrived on a clear morning when the snow had finally started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. He brought Mrs. Fletcher with him this time, and Caleb's stomach dropped when he saw her climbing down from the wagon. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," Morrison said formally, "this is the final inspection." They'd known it was coming, had prepared for weeks. The cabin was clean, the children were healthy, their lesson books were organized and ready for review. Everything was as perfect as they could make it, but Caleb still felt like he was about to face a firing squad. Mrs. Fletcher walked through the cabin slowly, taking in every detail. She looked at the sleeping loft where the children's beds were neatly made. She examined the kitchen area where Mara kept supplies organized. She picked up one of Thomas's reading books and flipped through it. "Where are the children?" she asked. "Outside," Mara said. "Caleb's teaching Thomas how to track deer. Emma's with them." "In this weather?" "The snow's melting, and they need to learn how to survive out here." Fletcher made a note. Then she said, "I'd like to observe them, without them knowing I'm watching." They went outside. In the clearing behind the cabin, Caleb was crouched beside Thomas, pointing at tracks in the mud. Emma sat on a fallen log nearby, watching with interest. "See how the prints are deeper here?" Caleb was saying. "That means the deer was moving slow, probably grazing." "How do you know it's a deer and not an elk?" Thomas asked. "Size of the hoof, shape of the track. Elk would be bigger, heavier. This is a doe, I'd say. Maybe with a fawn. Can we follow it?" "Not today, but tomorrow if you want, we can track it for real. See where it leads." Emma piped up. "Can I come too?" "If you stay quiet and keep up," Caleb said. "Deer spook easy." "I can be quiet." "You sure about that?" Thomas teased. "You talk more than anyone I know." Emma threw a pine cone at him. He dodged, laughing, and chased her around the clearing while she shrieked with delight. Caleb watched them with something like contentment on his face. It was the expression of a man who'd found something he didn't know he was looking for. Fletcher observed all of this in silence. Then she turned to Mara. "They seem happy." "They are, most days." "And the other days?" Mara didn't sugarcoat it. "The other days are hard. Emma still has nightmares. Thomas still carries too much responsibility for a boy his age, but we're working through it, together." "What about you and Mr. Thorne? What about us?" "Are you happy?" Mara hesitated. It was an intimate question, one she wasn't sure how to answer honestly. "I'm content. This isn't the life I imagined for myself. But it's a good life, a meaningful one. And yes, I suppose that makes me happy." Fletcher watched Caleb join the children's game, saw him lift Emma onto his shoulders while Thomas tried to tag them both. "He's different than when I first met him. In Cheyenne. He seemed angry then, closed off." "He was, but the children changed him, or maybe they just gave him a reason to change himself." They went back inside, and Fletcher spent another hour reviewing everything. The curriculum materials, The children's progress reports that Mara had carefully documented. The medical records from Dr. Brennan regarding Emma's illness and recovery. Finally, she closed her notebook and looked at both Caleb and Mara. "I came here expecting to find a sham," she said bluntly. "Two strangers play acting at marriage to manipulate the system. That's what my colleagues in Cheyenne believe. That's what I was sent to prove." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. Mara's hand found his under the table. "But that's not what I found," Fletcher continued. "What I found is a family. Unconventional, yes. Formed under unusual circumstances, absolutely. But a family nonetheless." She paused. "Those children are thriving. They're healthy, educated, and most importantly, they're loved. I can see it in everything here." "So what are you going to tell the committee?" Caleb asked. "I'm going to tell them that this arrangement is permanent, that you've met every requirement and exceeded most of them, and that separating these children now would be cruel and unnecessary." Relief flooded through Caleb so powerfully he had to sit down. Mara was crying. "Thank you. Don't thank me. You did the work, both of you." Fletcher stood. "The committee will convene next week to make it official. But consider this done. Those children are yours." After Fletcher and Morrison left, Caleb and Mara just stood there, trying to process what had happened. "We won," Mara said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We won. They're ours. Permanently." "Yeah." She turned to him, and before either of them could think about it, she threw her arms around his neck. Caleb caught her, holding tight, and they stood like that for a long moment. Two people who'd started as strangers and somehow become something more. When they finally pulled apart, both of them looked embarrassed. "Sorry," Mara said. It's fine. I know." They heard the children coming back, their voices carrying on the spring air. Thomas burst through the door first. "Is the lady gone? The one from Cheyenne?" "She's gone," Caleb said. "And what did she say?" Caleb looked at Mara, then back at Thomas. "She said you're staying, both of you, for good." Thomas's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Disbelief, hope, relief, joy. Then he was crying, and Emma was asking what was wrong, and Mara was explaining through her own tears, and soon all four of them were crying and laughing and holding each other. "We're really a family?" Emma asked, her small voice uncertain. "We're really a family," Mara confirmed. "Forever?" "Forever." That night they celebrated with a special dinner. Mara made her best stew, and they ate until they were stuffed. Thomas told stories that made them all laugh. Emma sang a song she'd learned, off-key but enthusiastic. And Caleb sat back and watched them all, these people who'd become his whole world, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the war, peace. Later, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Mara sat outside under a sky full of stars. "What now?" Mara asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've spent 6 months fighting for this. Fighting to keep them, to prove ourselves. Now that the fight's over, what do we do?" And Caleb thought about it. "We live. We raise them. We figure out how to be a real family, instead of one born out of necessity." "And us? What are we?" It was the question they'd been dancing around for months. Caleb turned to look at her, really look at her. This woman who'd stepped forward in a crowded saloon and changed his life, who'd stood beside him through every challenge, who'd become his partner in every sense of the word except one. "I don't know what we are," he admitted, "but I know I don't want you to leave, ever. Not just for the kids, for me." Mara's breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not good with words, and I'm not going to pretend this is some grand romance, but you're important to me. More important than I knew someone could be. And if you want this marriage to be real, really real, then I'm willing to try." She was quiet for so long he thought he'd made a mistake. Then she said, "I want that too, but I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing this, of messing it up. I lost one husband already. I don't know if I could survive losing another." "You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." "I can promise I'll try. That's all any of us can do." Mara looked at him, and in the starlight, He could see tears on her face. Then yes, let's try. Let's make this real. Caleb took her hand, and they sat like that until the cold drove them inside. The weeks that followed were different, softer somehow. They weren't pretending anymore, weren't performing for judges or committees. They were just living. Caleb moved his things into the bedroom he'd given Mara months ago. It felt strange at first, sharing that space with someone, but it also felt right. They were careful with each other, respectful of boundaries, learning how to be together in this new way. The children adjusted quickly. If anything, they seemed relieved that the adults had finally figured out what they'd known all along, that they belonged together. Spring turned into summer. The mountains transformed from white to green. Wildflowers bloomed in meadows. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Thomas grew taller, his voice starting to crack in that awkward way of boys becoming young men. He was reading everything he could find and asking questions that sometimes stumped even Caleb. He'd developed a passion for learning about the natural world, and Caleb taught him everything he knew about tracking, hunting, surviving in the wilderness. One day, they were out checking traps when Thomas asked, "What happened to you?" "In the war." Caleb had known this question would come eventually. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes you get this look, like you're somewhere else, somewhere bad. The war was a long time ago, but it still bothers you." Caleb couldn't deny that. "I saw things, did things I'm not proud of, and when it was over, I didn't know how to come back from that. So I ran, came out here and tried to forget." "Did it work? The forgetting?" "No, you can't forget things like that. But you can learn to live with them. And maybe, if you're lucky, you find something worth living for that makes the bad memories matter less." Thomas nodded slowly. "Like us? We're what you found?" "Yeah, like you. We're not going to fix you, whatever's broken inside." The maturity in that statement caught Caleb off guard. "I know. But we can help if you let us." "You already do, just by being here." They worked in silence for a while. Then Thomas said, "I'm glad you found us. Even though it was awful, and we almost died, and everything was terrible, I'm still glad." "Me too, kid. Me too." Emma blossomed in the summer warmth. The quiet, frightened girl they'd found in the snow was gone, replaced by someone vibrant and curious and full of life. She talked constantly now, asking questions about everything, making up elaborate stories, singing songs she'd invented. She followed Mara everywhere, learning to cook and sew and garden. Mara had started a small vegetable patch behind the cabin, and Emma treated it like her personal kingdom, carefully tending each plant. One evening, Emma came inside with dirt under her fingernails and excitement on her face. "Ma, the carrots are ready. Can we pull them for dinner?" Mara smiled. "Let's go look." They went outside together, and Emma carefully harvested the carrots she'd been watching grow for weeks. She washed them in the creek and brought them back like they were made of gold. "I grew these," she announced proudly to Caleb and Thomas. "You did a good job," Caleb said. "They're the best carrots in the whole world." "Probably are." At dinner, Emma insisted they all try her carrots first. They were small and slightly misshapen, but to Emma, they were perfect. And watching her face light up when everyone praised them, Caleb thought maybe she was right. That night, tucking Emma into bed, Mara sat beside her. "Do you remember your mama?" Mara asked gently. "Your first mama?" Emma nodded. "Sometimes. Not as much as I used to. Is that bad?" "No, sweetness, it's not bad. It's just what happens. Memories fade, but that doesn't mean you didn't love her or that she didn't love you. Do you think she'd be mad that I call you Ma now?" Mara's throat tightened. "I think she'd be grateful that you found someone to love you. That's what all mothers want, for their children to be loved and safe. I do love you, a lot. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." Emma yawned, already falling asleep. "Don't be scared. We're a family. Families stick together." Out of the mouths of babes, Mara thought. In July, they made a trip to town for supplies. It was the first time all four of them had gone together, and people noticed, stared, whispered. The mountain hermit who'd shocked everyone by demanding a wife had become a family man. It was gossip too good not to spread. At the general store, the owner's wife approached Mara. I heard about what you did. Taking in those children. That was real kind of you. It wasn't kindness. It was necessity. Still, not many would have stepped up like that. Mara didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded and went back to shopping. Outside, Caleb was talking to a rancher he knew slightly. The man gestured at Thomas and Emma, who were looking at penny candy in the store window. Those your kids? Yeah, Caleb said. It was the first time he'd claimed them like that to a stranger, without hesitation or explanation. Good-looking children. You're doing right by them. Trying to. That's all any of us can do. On the way back to the cabin, Emma fell asleep in the wagon bed. Thomas sat up front with Caleb and Mara, watching the mountains grow larger as they headed home. Did you see how people looked at us? Thomas asked. Yeah, Caleb said. Like we were weird. We are weird, but that's all right. Normal's overrated anyway. Thomas smiled at that. Pa? Yeah? I'm glad we're weird together. Me too, kid. August brought Judge Morrison one last time. He came unannounced, as was his way, and found them all working in the garden. Emma was picking beans, Thomas was pulling weeds, Caleb and Mara were repairing a fence that kept rabbits out. Afternoon, Judge, Caleb said, straightening. Just wanted to stop by, see how you're all doing. Morrison dismounted, looking around. Place looks good, different than when I first came out here. We've made some changes. I can see that. Morrison watched Emma carefully place beans in her basket, her tongue poking out in concentration. How are they adjusting? Better than we dared hope, Mara said. They're happy here. And you too? Caleb and Mara exchanged a look. Then Caleb said, We're good. Really good. Morrison nodded, satisfied. The committee made it official last week. Full custody, permanent. I brought the papers. He pulled documents from his saddlebag. You'll need to sign these. They did, right there in the garden, while the children played nearby. When it was done, Morrison shook both their hands. You did something remarkable here, he said. Took an impossible situation and made it work. Not many could have done that. We had good reasons to try, Mara said, looking at the children. Best reasons there are. Morrison mounted his horse. I don't expect I'll need to come back, but if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. After he left, they stood there holding the papers that made everything official, legal, real. We did it? Mara said. Yeah, we did. They called the children over and explained what the papers meant, that they were officially, legally, permanently a family. No one could take them away now. No more inspections, no more proving themselves. Thomas hugged Caleb so hard it hurt. Emma clung to Mara and cried happy tears. And Caleb realized that somewhere in the past year, his life had completely transformed. He'd gone from a man hiding from the world to someone with responsibilities, connections, love. It terrified him, but it also made him feel more alive than he'd felt in years. That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb and Mara sat outside like they'd done so many times before, but this time felt different, final, somehow. What are you thinking, Ma? Mara asked. That a year ago, I was alone, and I thought that's how I wanted it, how I'd always want it. And now? Now I can't imagine going back to that. Can't imagine this cabin without Thomas reading by the fire, or Emma singing off-key, or you organizing things I didn't even know needed organizing. Mara smiled. We do drive you a little crazy. Yeah, but it's a good kind of crazy. She leaned against him and he put his arm around her shoulders. It was a casual gesture, but it meant everything. Do you think they'll remember? Mara asked. Thomas and Emma. Do you think they'll remember their first parents? Some. Not as much as they get older, but that's not a bad thing. Their parents would want them to be happy, to move forward, not to spend their lives stuck in grief. You're probably right. I know I am, because if I'd died in that wagon, if Emma and Thomas had died, I'd want someone to save them, to give them a life worth living. And that's what we've done. They sat there as the sun set and the stars came out. Somewhere in the cabin, Emma murmured in her sleep, Thomas turned a page in whatever book he'd smuggled into bed. This was their life now, messy and complicated and full of more love than Caleb had ever thought possible. The years that followed proved that the foundation they'd built was solid. Thomas grew into a young man who was smart and kind and capable. He learned everything Caleb could teach him about surviving in the mountains, but he also developed his own interests. Books, maps, the idea of places beyond Wyoming that he might someday explore. When he was 16, he asked Caleb, "Would you be angry if I left?" Eventually, to see other places. Angry? No. Proud, maybe. Sad to see you go, but you're not meant to hide in these mountains forever. That was my path, not yours. But you're not hiding anymore. No, because you and Emma and your ma gave me something worth staying for. But you need to find your own path, and when you do, we'll support you. Emma grew into a girl who was fierce and funny and utterly fearless. She was the one who climbed the highest trees, who explored the furthest reaches of their land, who asked the hardest questions. She was also the one who held the family together in small ways, who remembered everyone's favorite foods and made sure to prepare them for birthdays, who noticed when Caleb was having a bad day and would sit with him quietly until it passed, who helped Mara when her arthritis started acting up, taking over the harder chores without being asked. When she was 14, she told Mara, "I want to be a teacher, like you taught us. I want to help other kids learn." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Then that's what you'll be." "You think I can?" "I know you can. You can be anything you want, Emma. The world's wide open for you." Caleb and Mara grew old together in that cabin. Not smoothly, not without fights and frustrations and moments of doubt, but together. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods, learned when to push and when to give space, learned that love wasn't always the grand gestures or passionate declarations. Sometimes it was just showing up, day after day, choosing to stay even when things got hard. One winter evening, when Thomas was 17 and Emma was 12, they all sat around the fire together. It was something they did less often now. Thomas had responsibilities that kept him busy. Emma had friends in town she visited. But tonight, they were all there, together. "Tell us the story," Emma said. "About how you and Pa met." Mara laughed. "You've heard it 100 times. I want to hear it again." So Mara told it. About the saloon and the desperate declaration and the woman who'd stepped forward when no one else would. About the marriage that started as necessity and became something real. "You saved us," Thomas said when she finished. "We saved each other, Caleb corrected. "All 4 of us." "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "Any of it?" Caleb and Mara looked at each other. Then Mara said, "Not for 1 second. Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts, because those are what made us who we are." Later, when the children had gone to bed, Caleb and Mara stood outside one last time. The stars were brilliant overhead, the mountains dark silhouettes against the sky. "We did all right, didn't we?" Caleb asked. "Better than all right. We built something good here, something that'll last long after we're gone." "You think they'll be okay when we're not here anymore?" "I think we taught them how to be okay, how to face hard things and come through them, how to love and be loved. That's all any parent can do." Caleb pulled her close. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do." "I know. I love you too." They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd found each other in the strangest circumstances and somehow made it work. Because that's what love is, Caleb had learned. Not the fairy tale version, not the easy, simple kind, but the messy, complicated, choose each other everyday kind. The kind that's built on trust and respect and shared struggle. The kind that lasts. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of connection and conflict, but they'd face it together. As a family, the family they'd chosen, the family they'd built, the family that had saved them all. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not how they'd started, but what they'd become. Not the impossible circumstances that brought them together, but the love that kept them there. 4 broken people who'd found each other in the snow and the darkness and the desperate need for connection. 4 broken people who'd become whole together.